Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of October Surprise, a podcast created for citizens by citizens in Pennsylvania's new 16th Congressional District. I'm Jim Roddy, a lifelong resident of Northwest Pennsylvania and your host for today's podcast. A little bit of background on our podcast before we get going. October Surprise features a series of interviews designed to educate listeners in Erie, Crawford, Mercer, Lawrence, and Butler Counties on key issues that face both our district and our 2 congressional candidates, incumbent Mike Kelly and challenger Ron DiNicola. On each podcast, we'll also discuss ethical leadership, which unfortunately is in rare supply in Washington, D.C. in 2018. We'll do a lot of talking today and throughout the month of October on this podcast, but our ultimate goal is action. For democracy to work, you have to participate. We can't be bystanders. So at a minimum, that means being an informed voter. You can help by sharing episodes of October Surprise with your family and at least 1 or 2 friends, those on-the-fence voters, not sure if they should vote, and if they're going to vote, not sure who they should vote for, who live in our district. The ultimate action is to vote on Election Day. Let's surprise the special interest groups, the political action committees, and the big money when we take back our district on Tuesday, November 6th, and once again, put people first. Finally, before we get going with our interview today, I'm not a political veteran or a campaign strategist. I don't have all the answers. But together, we're going to learn what's happening in our district by talking with elected officials, grassroots leaders, and extraordinary citizens from Pennsylvania 16 in each episode. Our special guest today is Jerry Mifsud. He's a familiar name in Erie. He served on city council for 8 years in the 1980s, spent his life in education, 10 years as a teacher, 26 years as an administrator, most notably the 20 years he spent as principal of Central High School, where he helped combine Erie Tech and Erie Academy. He also served as a director of administration for Erie County government, and he's a volunteer advisor for the Ron DiNicola campaign. And I also have to mention he's one of the greatest athletes in Northwest Pennsylvania at Cathedral Prep and Edinburgh University, and he was drafted by the Kansas City Royals. Jerry Mifsud, thanks for your time today. Welcome to October Surprise.
Well, good morning, Jim, and thanks for having me on. And I think I'm going to have you as my PR person from now on.
I would be happy to do that. So local sports is something that's near and dear to both you and me. I published Sports Look magazine. I can't believe it was now 20 years ago in the 1990s. And I could talk Erie sports with you all day long, but we'll have to say that for another time and place.
Sounds good.
Let's talk about education in our area. So you were a longtime teacher and school administrator, as I mentioned, and you're still tied in with that community. Can you help me and help our listeners understand what are the biggest challenges that you see facing teachers, students, and school districts in Northwest Pennsylvania and in Western Pennsylvania, all throughout the district?
Well, from my vantage point, being in the district for 36 years and now being out of the district, I have a son who happens to be the assistant principal at Erie High School, which is kind of unusual but kind of unique also. I think one of the biggest issues, if not the issue that I see, is funding, fair funding for all districts. Now, you got to commend Jay Badams, the former superintendent, who brought the issue to the forefront. Perfect example is I have a grandson who moved from one district to Fairview, and I would see what type of perks they have out there versus the Erie School District. It's just incredible. Just incredible. And I think that is one of the huge issues that certainly has an effect on school districts and the production of the students and what they do on a yearly basis.
And so you talk about fair funding. What should that look like? Like you said, the perks you saw in Fairview that were lacking in the city. Sure. What doesn't the city have that they could use?
Well, I think, first of all, if you I think the salaries are good. Don't misunderstand that point. I'm not saying that, but when you look at the city of Erie and they're paying $10 million out to some of these charter schools. $10 million. I mean, that just takes a hit from the from their general fund budgets, and it leaves a lot of things that are lacking. For example, I know when I was at Erie Central High School, I don't think that place has been remodeled since it was built in the 50s. Thank God they got some extra funding from the state, thanks to a lot of people pushing for all that. Otherwise, I think they would have closed up. They were in some dire straits.
Yeah.
So I go out to Fairview and I see beautiful buses, brand new buses. I see beautiful classrooms. I see extra personnel. It's just a different world. Money doesn't buy everything, but it certainly helps a great deal. And we have great teachers and administrators in the Erie School District, and I think they do a great job on what some of the things that they don't have. So I think that the funding issue is huge. I'd like to see them start renovating all them schools. And of course, I know people want to hear this also, and I think it's important. They have to be more accountable. The students have to be more accountable. The teachers, the administrators, the superintendent, the school board. And the school board, what they do is, their boss is the taxpayers. So that's the general lineup.
And so can you go down that line a little bit more from an accountability standpoint? So I can say my dad was a school teacher for decades in the Mill Creek School District. I know they had regular reviews and scoring and rating teachers and things like that. Is that what you're talking about, needs to have more accountability, or is it test scores? What are you talking about, if you can just paint a picture for us for accountability?
Yeah, I think it's all the above. I think, as an administrator, for an example, when I was there, I was held responsible for keeping the building safe and clean, having my test scores be comparable to national and state levels. Those are things I'm talking about. But also understand the fact, and I know we're talking about Ron and Nicola here a little bit shortly. It's a different world when our kids come into the Erie School District at an early age, pre-K. A lot of them don't have the vocabulary that a lot of the kids have in the other school districts. So, the pre-K programs are absolutely essential for that kid to meet certain standards. And if we don't have that program, these kids are going to be behind for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And we see it on and on. So, that's what I'm talking about when we talk about some funding. We need those types of programs to meet their needs in the district and compete to other school districts.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that. And so that kind of leads into my next question. What should our next congressional representative do about that? Like, I think a lot of people think, hey, isn't that just a city issue, or isn't this just a state funding issue? How does this tie in with our congressional representative in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I see it, all over the country, not just in the 16th district. We need to make sure that we are on an even playing field with other districts, not just because, people live in Fairview and have maybe a better means or a better living wage. We need to make sure it's an even playing field for a lot of these inner city kids and staff and administrators, all the above. That is critical in my mind.
Got it. I see what you're saying. So, and especially it's that early stages. I've always been a big fan personally of, put more money on the front side rather than on the back side building more jails. Like, spend the money to invest if folks get a better education and a better start.
Just as a side note, as the director of administration, I dealt with the prison. And, since a lot of these mental health institutions have been closed, I would talk to the warden almost daily, and he says, Jerry, he says, a lot of these people that are incarcerated, they have mental health issues, and a lot of the people that are incarcerated were special needs students also. So there's facilities there, that we need to maybe help our people that are incarcerated, but that takes money, and that's where I think Ron would be wide open to something like that, more federal funding to help some of these programs. And like you said, to load that early on, like pre-K, then I think that would help tremendously.
Yeah, just like some of the top athletes, you and I can probably spin this back into sports on a regular basis. Just like the top athletes, the ones who get the best training and those who are able to train year-round, as opposed to somebody who has to work a part-time job or never gets to learn the skills as a youngster, who's going to turn out better than the other. Not in every situation, but it's just certainly not a fair chance from that standpoint.
Yeah, I remember, and this might not be a good something to refer to. When I got drafted, I remember all the kids that were drafted from the South, the West, and here I am. I talk about what kind of a game schedule did you have? Well, we played like 75 to 150 practice games. Then we had like 75 actual games. How many did you have? Well, at Edinburgh, we played 20 and 10 were snowed out.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, just to give you a little bit of an analogy, you know what I mean? But they do it every day, all day. It means a big deal.
Right, and like you and I'm guessing are both on the same page, especially with athletics in our blood, of there is individual accountability. But quite frankly, the kid who has access to a gymnasium, a nice gymnasium, 40 hours a week, and a kid who only has access to one for 4 hours a week, well, who are you going to bet on to perform better? And that's, again, just bring the analogy back. There's just a lot of opportunities that kids don't have, and they need that support system, especially in some of these inner city areas.
And that's one of the reasons why I think Ron started the Police Athletic League. It paired up some of these inner city youth, and we started at Piper Burley, and they have a lot of youth there that are poverty-stricken, the highest number in the whole district. And we paired police officers with these young kids, grades 3 and 4, and it's exploding because they're starting to talk to these people. They become leaders and mentors, and I think back to my career. I thank God that I had some great coaches that not only taught me on the fields and the courts, but they gave me advice every day, which I needed.
Interesting you brought up Piper Burley, because earlier this summer, July 16th to be exact, we had Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. She toured Piper Burley with Mike Kelly, our current rep in Congress. And so I guess it's a kind way to describe DeVos as a controversial education secretary. There are a lot of folks in our area who were unhappy that she was in town. She has not been popular with administrators, parents, and teachers throughout the country. But here's what Mike Kelly tweeted that morning, quote, "Later today I'll have the extraordinary honor of welcoming Betsy DeVos to Erie, PA to visit Piper Burley Elementary School. Secretary DeVos has been working hard to improve our education system for every student in America. This is a very exciting day for our community." I'm guessing, Jerry, that you don't share his sentiments. Why is that? What do you disagree with what Betsy DeVos is doing and what Mike Kelly is supporting from an education standpoint in the United States?
Yeah, she's all about charter schools, and I think that's one of the reasons why she was put in that position. I'll say this up front. I didn't like how she was treated, and didn't speak well for everybody that was down there either. The PSEA was down there, and I thought they were opposing her position. But for people to start swearing and using different finger signs, I think it's terrible.
Yeah.
You got to respect the lady first, and secondly, as a secretary. And she still controls X number of dollars, and she can help the city of Erie. And we talk about funding, that's important. And I mentioned earlier in our recording that, a lot of these charter schools, they're just killing, like the Erie School District. And I think $10 million is a number that comes to mind that we're paying out for these charter schools. I'm all for competition, but make sure that we hold them accountable like we hold the public schools, too, by the way.
Right. So the biggest thing is getting back to that funding. Like, it all kind of starts and ends there, as DeVos is pulling money away from what's needed in the district, and it's going to these charter schools. It should stay where the kids who need it the most get the resources. Is that your thought?
Absolutely. I think you're right on with that.
And so, as I said, we want to talk about education, want to talk about leadership, so I'll bridge the two with this question. So, as we mentioned earlier, you're supporting Ron DiNicola for Congress. Why is he the right person to improve education in PA 16, and why is he the right leader in general for our district? So if you could talk about his education policies and him as a person.
Well, I think definitely he's a Democrat, and I think that speaks for itself. I think the biggest thing, I was looking at these questions that you wanted me to kind of answer, and I would say overall Ron has a great temperament, and I think that is absolutely critical. Some of the things that he's done here in Erie County is he's reached out to not only Republicans or Democrats, but Republicans also, and independents and what have you. He's done a great job, and he's brilliant. I'll say that right now. You sit into a room with him, and he doesn't overwhelm you with his conversation, but I'll tell you, he's spot on when he gets his teeth into something. And the one thing that I recall also is we hired him as the city or the county solicitor, and I got to work with him every day. So I sat in with him on meetings, and he cleaned up so many legal messes that the county had at the time. It was unbelievable. And he did it real quietly also. I mean, not a lot of fanfare, just he worked hard, and to me, I mean, that says a lot, because I was pretty much his superior at the time. And, of course, he made life easier for myself and Barry Grossman, who was our county executive at the time.
Again, tying back into that sports, the better athletes you have, the better coach you are, right? It makes it a lot easier on the coach when you got somebody that skilled.
Absolutely.
And so,
get the right people there.
And so it's interesting you mentioned, when, for these, the debates that are going to be happening, hopefully, for Congress, there's going to be no doubt after 5 minutes who has the background in car sales, and that's not Ron DiNicola. Like, he is certainly not, like you said, no one's going to accuse him of being a loudmouth by any means, but we see him speaking up, and that's kind of been my frustration with Mike Kelly is, one of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes is, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And just recently, we've seen in the past, less than a year, we've seen a credibly accused child molester be nominated for Senate in Mike Kelly's party, and he didn't say anything about it. We've seen families seeking asylum at our border. These aren't folks who are, quote-unquote, trying to sneak into the country. They're fleeing violence and persecution, and then they're being separated, the parents from the children, and yet again, Mike Kelly never says anything about that. He's just consistently a cheerleader for the administration and not holding them accountable, like you talked about is so important earlier. Can you talk about the importance in your leadership career of a leader to speak up when this happens, to put the people first as opposed to the party first? I'm interested to hear your perspective on that, Jerry.
Well, I think Ron will tell you this from listening to him many times. He's running, first of all, against Mike Kelly and not Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And that's an important distinction. But I agree with you. I think you wouldn't have to worry about Ron DiNicola speaking up if there's something that is close to his heart. And you talk about immigration. His father immigrated over here. He's a great story in himself. He went to school on the, what do you call it, from the
GI Bill?
The GI Bill. Went to Harvard. Mm-hmm. Just incredible, and then got his degree, I think, from Georgetown after that. So, no, I think we do get frustrated when we turn that TV on every day. I was watching Giuliani this morning. That could make you sick too. But no, I think he needs to speak up rather than be just a cheerleader. But I think you can't not speak up in thinking that this is going to get you reelected. To keep the Republicans in their positions, and keep looking at those numbers or those ratings, see how you're doing. You've got to speak up on these very difficult issues. And from my background, people tell me, says, well, why are you in politics? I says, well, you know what? Someone's got to step up and speak and do what is right, not just to say or do something to get elected next time. I think that's very important, and we need good politicians. I'm not afraid to say that, good politicians more than ever today. And Ron is a good guy and a great politician. And I mean that in the best sense of the word.
Yeah, I remember reading a quote where we have plenty of people who want to be idols today, but we have very few people who have the courage to stand up and be true leaders and say the things that might not be the most popular, and that's important. Again, tying back in with athletics, a lot of coaches you played for, I'm sure, didn't say things that were popular with the team in terms of run another lap or do this extra work. But it's important for people to hear that. I guess if we can go down that thread a little bit more, who were some of the coaches that influenced you, and what were some of the things that you learned that you applied, in your role as a leader, as an educator?
Well, I always remember a gentleman by the name of Gus Thomas. He's kind of legendary to some of the prep alumni and what have you. Mm-hmm. I remember my 9th grade science class. I think my first test was on the elements, and I got it back, and I think I got some abysmal failure. So he pointed me out to the whole class. And he says, Mifsud, you can take your athletic ability and stick it in your ear. You don't start doing what you need to do academically. And I always remembered that. And I tried to always hold that when I was a principal. I always used to say at Central High School we had an all-state team, but not all of them had a 2.0 at the time. And I wouldn't move on that. And I said, if they can't get a 2.0 or a C in the classroom, they quit you in the classroom, they'll quit you on the football field or the gymnasium. And I kind of stuck by that philosophy.
Great, and that's true. Like you said, getting back to that whole accountability thing, if your coaches hold you accountable, you end up holding yourself accountable, and it goes from there. Yep. Any other coaches or teachers who had an influence on you, things you remember?
Well, I think Len Sitersky, again, another legend, was just a great guy. He was a tremendous motivator. I believe he started at Notre Dame, had a great history. I don't think he finished there, but we were fortunate to have him around, and he was always a great guy to be around. You can bounce off questions and concerns that you had that you couldn't talk to people on the street about, your friends, so to speak. And I think that was important. and I always refer back to the Police Athletic League. When I talk to some of these kids, I always say to them, I said, listen, you might have issues at the house. It could be one parent, could be no food that day, it could be social issues in the neighborhood. Now you've got almost a whole police force. You almost have the whole sheriff's department. You can talk to any of these guys or gals, and they'll give you good advice. So I think this program has really done a great job for a lot of kids in Erie City.
Great. And just, you mentioned, Gus Thomas, Len Sitersky, there's other folks who influenced you. Back to where we started off earlier, if you have an educational system that attracts really good people like that, that's going to benefit the kids. But if you have a situation where they never have the funding, they never have the facilities, they never have what they need, anybody listening to this would say, well, I wouldn't go work for an employer like that. I'd go find somebody else. And that's what I think it just ties in with. We need to create an atmosphere that attracts really, really good coaches, really, really good teachers, like the folks who you mentioned.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. We're only as good as the people we hire. I ran into a young lady I hired 25 years ago at one of the clothing stores not too long ago. And I pulled her aside. I said, I want to tell you something why I hired you. And there was maybe 6 or 7 good candidates. She was a math teacher. She said, why'd you hire me? I said, well, I put everything together. You all had this pretty good credentials. I said, but I hired you because you had tremendous enthusiasm for your job. And I always remember that. And she says, thank you. She says, and I still have it. And I like that.
Very nice. My last question for you before we wrap up is, I mentioned at the outset I published Sports Look magazine back in the 90s. We did a special issue where we ranked the top male high school athletes from 1945 to 1985. You, Jerry, were number 4. I don't know if you remember the other folks who were in the top 5. Number 1 was Art Baker from Academy, the first African-American NCAA wrestling champ. Folks don't realize he's from Erie. Number 2 was Carmen Riazzi from Tech, great basketball player at Dayton. Mel Laskoff, Mr. All-Everything at East High School. And then you came in a step ahead of Fred Blitnikoff from Tech, who, as folks know, went on to have a great college career at Florida State and in the NFL. And so you're in the top 5. So I'm glad we could connect today. Like I said, I've always admired what you've done on the field and off the field. So I'm guessing it feels good to still be in the conversation with some of those great athletes.
Well, I think I'm way overblown. I should have been 4 or 5. Those are some great athletes, and I'm just proud to be mentioned in their presence, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I do appreciate it, though.
Well, and I guess I'm also glad to see, just to wrap it up, that you didn't stop there. Too many times athletes believe this is the best, it's never going to get better, but you've been working on having good days for other students and not just for yourself from a scholastic standpoint. So, Jerry, thank you very much today for your time and efforts. It's greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I want to applaud you on what you're trying to do is get that vote out, and I think it's critical. We need to get more young people out there, and even some of the older people that just don't vote anymore for whatever reason. This is a very important election, and we're looking forward to it on November 6th.
Well, thank you, and you set me up perfectly for my close here. So our podcast today is over, but there's still more that we need to do. As we mentioned at the start, for democracy to work, we can't be bystanders. We have to participate, and you can help by sharing this episode with your family and at least 1 or 2 of those on-the-fence voters who live in our district, and then finally by voting on Election Day. Let's surprise the special interest groups, the political action committees, and the big money when we take back our district on Tuesday, November 6th, and once again, put people first. I'm Jim Roddy. Thanks so much for listening to October Surprise.